Good evening, everyone. Today is day 10, March 19th today, 2019. We've got ECS 110. We only have 3 more classes after this, I believe. And today you have probably already handed in your assignment in relation to the self-stories that you have been doing throughout the semester. If you need to hand it in after class, that's fine. And for some reason, if you're having troubles submitting or posting it on your blog, please let me know if you're going to be late submitting. So it is due today. This week, we also have another round of small group conversations in the Zoom meetings on Thursday and Friday. And I encourage you to remind yourself about the schedule for round 2. So we have Thursday beginning at noon because of the time change, and Dale's in Calgary. So we're going to meet with her over lunch hour so that it works with her. And I think I haven't made any errors this time. They're all half-an-hour blocks. And then we have a few sessions on Friday afternoon, sort of mid-afternoon. So make sure you are reminded of when you scheduled yourself in those spaces, and if for some reason something's come up for you, please let me know before the date so I can make some accommodations. Any questions there? Okay, we also have folks doing reading response number 3 this week. We have 2 more of those left, so a group of students who will be posting this upcoming week. And those students are Carter, Christina, Sean, Jana, Emily, Elle, and Bree. And then also this upcoming week, you are to submit your Mythbusters assignment and use the form that I've linked here. I've linked it in 2 spots. You only have to fill it out once, but I want everyone to fill it out. So I want to know your name. I want to know what group you're in. I want to know the link, so everyone should know what the link is. And then I want you to comment on your own contributions as well as how you work together. And if you want to say anything in particular about any of your group members, you can do that as well. Is there anything that maybe I missed here that you want me to ask you about?
When you say link, are you thinking like a YouTube link or?
Yes. So
like
yes. So what I usually suggest, it's the easiest way to share either on your blog and with the class in general, is so whatever movie maker you're using, if you have an Apple, it's probably the iMovie Maker, or if you have a non-MacBook, then there are other kinds of movie makers that you can use, either on the internet or the one that comes with your computer. And so finish that project and then upload it to YouTube is the easiest way to share. There's the least amount of problems I have experienced is when we do it through YouTube. And if you don't want to make it public, that's fine. Just make it unlisted. Don't make it private, because private means only the people who have access to that YouTube account can view it. So you need to either make it unlisted or public. Unlisted just means anyone with the link can view it. If you want to post it to your blog, you're welcome to do that. But I find that using a link to YouTube works the best, even on your blogs. Is that clear? So you all have a Google account, which means you all have a YouTube account, whether or not you know it. So when you go to YouTube, there is a space in the top right-hand corner that allows you to upload a video right here. Create a video or post, and it's as easy as that. So that assessment piece, that comment piece is linked for you in the weekly plans. Just to clarify, there's a question in the chat about the small group conversations for this week. Those start at 12:15 on Thursday and Friday mid-afternoon. So check out the link here for your sign-up sheet. I've just put it back. You don't have to scroll all the way up to the top where you signed up. The same sign-up sheet is right here. And then for the rest of the week, there are some things to read around bodies, and thinking about ableism is our sort of next main topic. There are some videos to take peeks at, and some guiding questions to think through. This piece right here, Becoming Dishuman, is a challenging academic article. So don't get discouraged. I want you to look for ideas more than attempting to understand every single bit of the article. So look for something that provokes you to think differently, in particular the ideas of disability with the slash and becoming dishuman with the slash. Like, what does the slash mean, and how does it disrupt the idea of a normal body? So that's upcoming. The week after, we are going to take a bigger look at the Mythbuster pieces and intersectionality again. And then for our last class, we'll do a bit, provided that our class is run as normal, we'll do a bit of discussion about the Mythbuster pieces. So that will be mostly it for the course. So today, we are going to begin with the Disney representations of gender that I asked you to think through at the end of last class. So I'll put you into breakout groups. You'll take a peek at if the movie passed this test or not, and why, with some of the pieces that were added. And what we learned about gender roles there. So you can look at any of these entries, whichever one are most your breakout group is most interested in. It doesn't necessarily have to be one that the folks from your group added. Would you also like the list from last semester? Is that of interest to you? We're talking about? Okay, I'll post both of those links. They didn't have to say if it passed the test or not, but just see the similarities maybe in some of them, and I think they have maybe a longer list. So I'll put both of those links in the chat. And again, I want you to ask yourselves the question, why are these things important to notice? So we're all back. How did that conversation go? What will you share with us related to why this is important to notice, either the test or the ideas that are reproduced in Disney related to gender, both and or? Who would like to start? Any takers?
I can start.
Sounds good.
Okay. We talked about Cinderella because on the chart it says yes, but you have to kind of if you know the movie, it's basically about a girl who was a slave to her family until she was rescued by a man. So it's a yes because there's female characters, but those female characters, they're not valuable female characters, well, that's probably not, they are valuable to the story, but it's the very stereotypical story of a man saving a woman because she didn't get out of that situation on her own. She had to find a man to get her out of it. So yeah.
And I guess here the third point is probably the most important. Do they talk about something other than a man? They do talk to each other. The women in the story do talk to each other, but is it predominantly about finding love, escaping the terrible home life, etc.? Yeah, very good. Who else would like to share?
I'll share. So our group kind of talked about how we hadn't even thought about this until we had to look at it. And one of our members was kind of well, it's hard to, we just want to be entertained for 90 minutes. So it's sometimes challenging to look and see, like, why is this important? But we kind of saw it on both sides. Like, there's lots of movies where the female character requires a man to either save her or like rescue her, or her goal in the whole movie is to fall in love. But it's also really neat to see how lots of newer movies are coming out where it is just that entertaining factor, and it's Toy Story, or it's, you know, there isn't necessarily a love story or a reliance on a gender, like female to male, to save the world or anything. Like Moana, for instance, she was completely able to do it by, like, she had man's help, but it wasn't her reliance on a man that made it successful. Like, she did that by herself. So we kind of were torn because I didn't think about it till now.
Yeah, very good. So even Frozen is a movie that gets talked about a lot as being a feminist movie, but there are a lot of problematic pieces in Frozen as well related to gender. Maybe when we're looking at Moana in terms of gender, it's a little bit of a better outcome. But Moana, remember intersectionality? Moana is often touted as being Disney attempting to decolonize. And I would argue that Moana is another cultural appropriation of someone else's story that Disney has used for profit. So, you know, when we've been talking a little bit about like critical theory asking us to look at the world through different lenses, and sometimes that feels negative, or it feels like we're always dumping on things that are, or experiences that are trying to be better. But if we remember that critical theory asks us to make the world or our understandings of the world a little bit more complex, maybe we can turn that around and think that that's actually a positive thing, that we're not allowing a particular kind of entertainment and enjoyment of a story to then allow us to reproduce the normative narrative. Sure, maybe we can still enjoy it, but also to understand, like, oh, wait, there might be some problems with this. There's sort of a famous or an interesting way to think about that kind of feminism. And there's books about it. It's called Being a Feminist Killjoy. And I sort of like to identify as a killjoy in some ways, even though I also want to be a positive person and a person who finds joy in life. But I think that I'm very attached to the idea of being a good woman, and that normative narrative has been very strong in my life. And I think that's why I have the desire to be a good girl, a good teacher, a good person, someone who is always positive and looking on the bright side. Not that that is necessarily bad, but the killjoy piece allows me to then complicate it and say, like, wait a second, it's okay that I'm asking questions about the world, and it's okay that I want to make things more complex. It doesn't have to be so straightforward, just positive or negative. It doesn't have to be that binary of one or the other, but we can hold both of those things, or multiplicities of being positive, along with a whole bunch of ways to look at things through a critical view. And I want to think that that is a good practice. So who else wants to talk about what this meant to them? Why is this important to notice?
Our group talked about like The Little Mermaid and how it actually, most of these Disney movies degrade women. And that, so like Little Mermaid, for example, the whole point was this girl who had a deformity needed to change in order to be accepted by the prince in the end. And we also talked about Cinderella, like the same, where she needed the prince to save her from her life. Then we also talked about the Incredibles and how it's a family, so that one might be able to pass because it's a family, so the roles are a little bit more equal.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what is her name in The Incredibles? The woman, the stretchy woman. What's her name?
It's like Elastigirl or something like that.
Yeah. Elastigirl. Elastigirl, right. She definitely has a strong mind. So or like a strong will, like she is a strong character. She isn't pushed around. So yeah, sure, that's an interesting way to think about womanhood being represented differently. We can go back to the Little Mermaid also and say like this part about not speaking, like that her voice is literally taken away from her, could also be indicative of the way that we think about patriarchy in society. Again, we're not talking about specific men, specific individuals, but that patriarchy is the way that our system in Western society runs and in other societies. So it's almost like a metaphor for the way that women experience the world in various contexts. Does anyone else want to share something in particular from this discussion?
We just kind of talked about we talked about the Incredibles and how that they like weren't discriminative, I guess, towards genders, that they did include like women and girls having powers as well, not just the boys. But in a way, they kind of were by like Mr. Incredible as a man, and he was, of course, like the big, strong, powerful one. That's kind of what we talked about.
Yeah, we can even talk about how that reproduces the idea of hypermasculinity. So even feminism isn't just about empowering women. It's also about disrupting and dismantling the system, the gender binary system of boys have to be like this and girls have to be like this. It's a disruption of the categories themselves. Talked a little bit about the third and fourth waves of feminism, and that's sort of what I mean here. Last call for comments on why this is an important conversation to have. We're just using gender in Disney as an example. We can look more broadly at film and video and music and other art forms as well. Last call?
I just wanted to add something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, most of the people in our group had a similar experience to me. Like, as I was looking through different Disney movies, it was very difficult to find any that passed the test, and some of the ones that did, you really had to dig deep to almost make them pass the test. And a lot of the conversations that happened between female characters that weren't specifically about men still had like a hidden intention of men or a romance between a woman and a man. So, and a lot of Disney movies are directed at children. So we also talked about the message that we're sending to specifically young girls, like that they need to have a man to be successful.
Yeah, for sure. So there's that normative narrative that's going on, and there's also the normative narrative about what young boys need to be. So it's like all of these things. Is Peter Pan a acceptable version of what a man should be in all of this collection of men? I would say probably not necessarily in terms of how Peter Pan looks, or even what's this fellow's name again? This is the Dalmatians movie, right? He's a piano player. He's tall. He's lanky.
Oh,
so this
Roger.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Roger.
Yeah. Sure. So this is another non-stereotypical representation of men, and if we look at the way that Disney represents men in general, it's quite problematic. Like it's a one kind of way, and then these different kinds of way to be a man are very in the minority. So it's a problem for both men and women. Feminism tries to disrupt both of those things. It's not just all about women all the time. Let's talk about this a little bit. I asked you to look at this video, this sort of a Mythbusters video from some students from the U of S from a few years ago, and the ways that sexism is attempted to be disrupted and the way that they notice the intersections of gender and sexuality. And sort of, I'd like to hear your reactions just generally. Like, of course, it's quite explicit on purpose. So maybe you want to talk about that, or maybe you want to talk about sort of halfway through when they flip the script and reverse the roles. Does anyone want to comment?
I think the video was very interesting. I think it definitely plays off of sex sells. That's, I think, where this culture comes from. I thought their reaction kind of when they reversed the roles was interesting. It all of a sudden became funny, whereas before it was kind of serious and, oh, they're doing something taboo. And then they reverse the roles and it's ridiculous and funny.
Yeah, and so why do you think it's ridiculous and funny? What's going on there when the roles are reversed and then it suddenly becomes like, oh yeah, that's super silly? What is the point there? Why did they use that mode in order to disrupt the myth?
We're not used to seeing men in that role. And so when we do see them in that role, it doesn't seem right.
Yeah, we would never put men in that role, right? In that kind of situation in order to sell products. It's not done in the same way. Maybe we can find some non-examples where men are sexualized, but the point here is that women on the whole are sexualized more extremely than men would be overall, right? And so the reason this video, the student produced assignment got a lot of traction is because they were provocative in the way that they just simply took something that we see on a daily or like on a normal basis and attempted to point out how ridiculous or wrong it is to have women in those situations to sell stuff. Does anyone else want to comment? Your reaction or thoughts about how it was effective, the myth that they busted?
Only that if it's if it was amusing to see it happen with the men, then it can't be right either way. It shouldn't be done on either side, because obviously if it's that provocative a change, that should say something about what's being shown in our ads on TV.
Yeah, there's maybe also maybe an unintentional side effect of showing how we also expect certain kinds of bodies to be part of these kinds of sexualized ads. So I think there was at least one man who maybe wasn't like the kind of fit, really muscular man that we would normally associate with sexuality in, when I say we would normally, I mean in a normative narrative kind of sense, in a societal kind of sense. And so they're also disrupting the idea of what's sexy or what could potentially, what is most commonly viewed as sexy kinds of bodies. And here's where the intersections of gender and sexuality interplay. So just another little note about Mythbusters. I had intended to ask you all how timing is going for you earlier in the evening. And so I just wanted to do a quick check-in. Like, is Tuesday, March 26th going to happen for you? How are you all feeling? What point are you at? I'm just doing it's just a really quick check-in.
So for the Fantastic Four, we're moving along quite quickly. We have a rough draft of the video that we're going to produce as our final project. So I would say we're definitely ready for the 26th.
Thanks, Meg. Let's have another group check-in. Where are you at? What's going on with you? I'm putting everyone on.
Our group probably be done tonight, maybe tomorrow, depending
Oh,
on
yeah.
editing.
Okay, that sounds good.
So we're doing well.
Does anyone have any
I'm having
questions or concerns? Go ahead, Danica. Sorry.
I'm having trouble sending my video, and or we each did a portion of the video, and then we're trying to send them all to Scott to put it together. And I have tried several different formats, and I can't get it to send. So I just wondered if anyone had any insight to that. I do not have an Apple computer, so it is not iMovie. And yeah, I don't know if anyone.
Maybe stay after, and if others are having this issue, we can try and sort those kinds of things out together after class, those logistical things. Any other questions, concerns?
Yeah, I would say Google Drive would help. Oops, sorry, but
No,
yeah,
you go
I would
ahead.
Google Drive.
My question is it due at midnight or before class, or is there a certain time?
I'm flexible on the time. I usually just say any time during that day. I don't have a particular like time. Midnight's fine if you want to stay up till midnight, I guess. Yeah, sure. So with that note, if you meet with your group after class tonight or something, or say you encounter an issue 2 days from now and you need an extra day or something happens and you need a little bit of buffer, just give me an email, but make sure you CC all of your group members on that communication, and just request with a date that you foresee that you would be able to submit it. Okay, so there's a little tiny bit of flexibility, but I need you to communicate with me. I don't want you emailing me, last minute and saying, we're a week out, we're not even close. That shouldn't happen. But if sometimes unforeseen things happen and you need a little bit more time, that's fine with me as long as you communicate it. Is that okay? Okay. If you have specific questions about your Mythbuster piece, just stay after class and we'll try and work some things through with you. So let's continue talking about gender performances there. This gender and ads piece really tried to have us think about how we perform our gender in extreme ways, or how gender is represented in extreme ways. We also see this happening in models. So in advertisements, more generally, but also when we think about models for selling clothes or high fashion. So this is taken from an activity online. Often teachers, we Google stuff and we try to imagine yourself teaching grade 8 where you want to take up some gender conversations with your grade 8 students, for example. So we Google something and there's an activity there for us. So here's the website, and this is where I got that photo from, right? Here is an explanation of the activity, and so we do it. So here's the activity. What do you notice about these models? Do you think they're a boy or a girl, maybe? Or why would you think that they're a boy or a girl? Let's start there. What are your first thoughts? Model A.
Woman.
Susie says woman. Yeah. Austin on the chat says girl. Good. More. So in the chat or aloud, whatever you feel most comfortable doing, I want you to say why you think model A, why you perceive her performance of her gender to be woman. And I use the pronoun her here because you're all so far identifying her as or perceiving her to be woman.
Because she's wearing jewelry and lots of makeup.
Okay, so around the eyes, makeup around the eyes, the dark eyes. Jewelry.
Slim. She has a slim, feminine build, like small shoulders.
Remember, the word feminine relates to gender. Very good. So feminine build, a slim feminine build was the wording there. What about the facial features? There's a couple of people talking about facial features there. Longer hair, but what's with her features? Austin says the lips, the way that her lips are kind of like full.
I would say her cheekbones. Yeah, someone said that at the same time. Yeah, they're her cheekbones and how like underneath is kind of like sunken in a bit.
Like right here, like high cheekbones.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move to then model B. Woman or man? Woman or man? Model B. Either in the chat or aloud.
I still think it's a woman. Like, well, like, whether she goes by it or not, I think it was like the original gender was a woman.
Okay.
I think it's female because if you look at, I don't know if this is like stereotypical or wrong, but like her or his face is just so like smooth and like, I would think.
So you mean like they don't have facial hair?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So then this one's maybe not as clear for you all. Let's talk about some of the cues, some of the performances here that might lead us to wonder if they are a man. What are some of the perceptions around this person as a man?
One thing I noticed was the short hair, then also the lips and the super defined jawline. So I personally think it's a man, but that's just what I think.
So the jawline is different than model A and the lips are different is what you're saying? What's with the lips?
The lips are smaller.
Okay. Like thinner?
Male. Yeah, they're thinner. I'm not saying that like all males have thin lips, but just kind of looks a little more masculine, I guess.
And so maybe the makeup is different as well. There's a lack of the kind of dramatic makeup, but maybe there's still a little bit of mascara or something. Okay, the clothes are maybe a little bit more neutral. Is there any other cues that might lead someone to perceive this person to be a man? The elastic on the wrist, or is that a bracelet? Not sure, right? It's not as clear. Yeah. Okay. So the website, the website with the activity that explains this, the models and their identities, is that model A models both men's and women's wear. So is often referred to as an androgynous model from the time that this website was written. So model A model both men and women's wear. And that model B, Casey, exclusively modeled men's wear at the time that this activity was explained in the website. And the website says that Andre is male and Casey is female. So model A, the website is saying model A is male and model B is female. So what do you think about that? What are these terms referring to again, if we can be reminded of the language from last week? If the website says model A is male and model B is female, what is that referring to? What is that language talking about?
Would it be their sex?
Yes, very good. In particular, they're referring to their biological anatomy, their parts. They're asking about vaginas and penises here when we talk about the words male and female specifically. So an activity like this is useful in certain ways because it asks us to realize that gender in a lot of ways is just a performance. It's not necessarily something that we're born with, wanting to wear jewelry in this way. But also that we are born with particular kinds of attachments to performing our genders, but it's not as specific as like, I want to wear makeup because I'm a girl, or I don't want to wear makeup because I'm a boy. It's not that straightforward, right? So it's really complex. So we need to remember that male and female is talking about biological anatomy, and the other words like woman and man, masculine, feminine, those are gender words. Those are talking about performance more than bodies. So in fact, Andre now goes by Andrea. She transitioned, and so her pronouns are her, she, and hers. And one of the websites that I was reading says that she, I'll just show it to you quick, is tired of answering questions about her vagina, right? As a trans person, can you imagine how many times someone asks them what's underneath their clothes? As a cis woman, I don't get asked that, right? But trans people get asked it all the time, and that's actually a violent question. So it's good to pay attention to the ways that we take up and perceive other people's genders. We can also ask, and we could ask our students, how did you react to the truth, to the switch, I guess, or to the complicated way or the confusing way that we were going back and forth about Model B, about Casey, that gender performances aren't so straightforward. We could ask about how this challenges our notions of the gender binary. So even this activity, when I say, is Model A a woman or a man, a boy or a girl? Is Model B, do you perceive them to be a boy or a girl? That reproduces the gender binary, even in that activity. So it's good to ask ourselves about our reactions and the ways in which gender performances can challenge gender norms. They can reproduce gender norms, and they can also challenge them. You can also ask yourself how you yourself perform your own gender. We did this a little bit last week with sort of analyzing the clothing that you were wearing. It's really important that we remember, and perhaps we could use this example, this activity, in a positive way to say that this modeling work shows that gender is a performance. It doesn't necessarily have to be tied to a performance, the performer's biological anatomy. So gender performances instead are the way in which we read people, the way we perceive them, and how our bodies are marked as masculine or marked as feminine or marked as something that doesn't fit in those categories. We perform gender in particular ways, sometimes because of gender police. Those comments that are like, you should cut your hair, or why are you wearing that? Those are gender police comments. But we perform our gender in ways so that we're understandable to each other most often, and to try and belong in some sort of category. That's often the reason for reproducing a gender binary, even if we don't necessarily fully identify with that binary. So we're constantly working within and against these normative narratives about gender when we perform gender. There is something that is innate about gender, like I was referring to it as we're born with a gender understanding of ourself. Perhaps we can think of it as a feeling of identifying in particular ways, but also we choose how we present that innate understanding of ourselves to the rest of the world, either in order to belong and be intelligible and to be understandable by others, or to disrupt normative narratives about gender. So here's an example of a disruption. Make it a bit bigger. This is from an acquaintance of mine who posted on Facebook in the fall. She has 2 little kids who both identify as boys. So they went to Valley Village and both kids asked for dresses. And she was a bit worried, I believe, even though, you know, as a mom, understanding that gender rules for clothes are pretty silly. Like, who has decided all of a sudden that girls have to wear this and boys have to wear that? Yet at the same time, the gender police show up in our fears. We don't want our kids to be made fun of, get teased, get hurt. And we also want them to be able to express themselves. So it's this complicated tension of back and forth of trying to figure out how do we teach kids to reject or to disrupt the gender binary, but also know that this might have certain real world consequences. And she just asks all of us to be nice in the world. Can we just all be nice to each other, no matter what we're wearing, no matter how we're presenting? That's a really hopeful way of thinking about disrupting the gender binary. Does anyone know the Princess Boy story? Yes, no?
Doesn't he just dressing up like dress, like wearing dresses or something?
Yeah, so this
He's like
particular,
wearing dresses and enjoys it.
yeah, pretty much. This particular boy likes to wear dresses.
Dyson Kilo Davis is 5 years old, just like any other little boy, except that Dyson likes to wear dresses. Beach dresses, wedding dresses, disco dresses, cheerleader outfits, and especially princess dresses.
They make me feel happy and I like them what they are.
Dyson started wearing dresses when he was barely 2 years old.
Does this mean that Dyson is trans? Is actually a trans girl? No.
I don't think so.
Nope. Dyson just likes to wear dresses. And in the future, you know, whatever, if Dyson continues to want to identify as a boy and wear dresses, that should be okay. So again, we're disrupting the gender binary there. I've included the rest of this video in the weekly plans as a link in today's activities here, Princess Boy and the book. So there's a children's book that is mom made to try and help talk to other kids about gender variance and performance. It's a pretty good book and it's highly recommended by trans people and trans advocates in educational contexts. So there are quite a few books like that actually that are useful in those contexts. And that's one of them. So we know when someone doesn't conform to the gender binary, we know what happens, right? We know that this is an oppressive experience for those who don't fit within the dualistic category of woman or man, who aren't understood as acceptable. We know that there's costs. We've seen it happen in our own school experiences when people step outside of those traditional gender stereotypes or normative narratives. We've seen insults and violence and attempts to prove manhood, for example, or attempts to prove femininity. We've seen repression, especially in boys, related to sensitivity and emotionality, towards reproducing hypermasculinity. So again, feminism isn't just for women. It also attempts to address the issues that boys are experiencing that ask them to reproduce a gender binary in really problematic ways. Those hegemonic, heterosexual, masculine moments of boys' lives in school that hegemony, again, is like the where the dominant view is placed on everyone else in society. So there are initiatives like Man Up Against Violence that attempts to re-understand the idea of man up, which normally just means in a normative narrative way. What does it mean?
Toughen up.
Yep. Stop crying. Don't be a girl. Yeah. So instead of requiring men to perform hypermasculinity, and hypermasculinity often reproduces violence against women and against trans peoples in general, not just trans women, but also trans men. And this is sort of what we were talking about last week in terms of sexism. The reproduction of hypermasculinity is one of the reasons that sexism is so prevalent, even in those small, subtle ways. So heteronormativity is a term that we can use to explain the idea of where sexism comes from, the ideas of hypermasculinity, the ideas of hyperfemininity, the idea of using sex to sell. All of that is based on heteronormativity. Again, the root word here is normal, like normal bodies are straight is the interpretation of that big word. So heteronormativity is connected with white privilege and rape culture. Gay-straight alliances can work to disrupt this in schools. I think I asked you to read a bit about Brock Turner, Brock Turner's case, and that he was only in jail for 3 of the 6 months sentence for 3 counts of sexual assault. So you can think about the discourse that was happening around Brock Turner. Like, he was just a kid. He made a mistake. It's going to hurt his career. All of those things are related to patriarchy and heteronormativity. Again, it's not just about one kid. It's not just that Brock Turner is a bad dude, even though he did bad things. We're not saying that patriarchy is just part of individuals' actions, but that these individuals who act in these ways do so because heteronormativity allows it to happen. So homophobic language is also one of the insidious practices that reproduces heteronormativity. How often do you hear homophobic language in your daily interactions? I hope it's reducing, but then when we look on the internet, this is a website that counts the number of times that these words have been tweeted just today. So whoever is on Twitter is the population, and this is how many times these 4 phrases or words have been used just today. We can look at last week as well. And so for some reason last week, there was a spike of the word dyke. Who knows why? And we can look at in all Twitter time, of course. So we want to say that these words are being used less and less and less, and perhaps some of them are, but we can also see these spikes, right? So this doesn't mean that this is that these words are overall being phased out. They are still being used in derogatory ways. There is history with these words as well. There's history with the word faggot that has to do with a bundle of sticks that was tied together to use for firewood, and then the way that slaves historically were bundled together to be sold or for other purposes. And so these things are intersecting, and the words have history, and the way that they're used in derogatory moments is unacceptable. So we can't just say that things are getting better. That's always focusing on like the hope that things are getting better also allows us to pretend that we don't have to do anything about it. For some, anyway. So we have some of these words that we want to start practicing. Heteronormativity, heterosexism, which is the illusion that heterosexuality is the normal or natural way to be. Homophobia and hegemonic masculinity. So hopefully some of these things have come up for you when you were looking at your gender stories and in the readings that you've been taking up in the past couple weeks. There are some good teaching tools that are on the internet that can be used in classrooms to help students and to help us understand that gender identity, gender expression, even biological sex and as well as sexual orientation are all spectrums. So even though it's easy for us to assume that biological sex is just female or male, vagina or penis, it's not as straightforward as that. There are bodies that are not necessarily just female or just male. And the term hermaphrodite is no longer in use, just as a side note. So we usually think about identity in terms of a cognitive understanding of ourselves. Orientation is something that we feel, and expression is like our performance. This is just another version of the genderbread person that helps us to understand that, here, I'll make it bigger for you so that you can see it a little bit better. Sorry, it was quite small. That there are different identity terms. So sometimes people refer to these as labels, but they don't necessarily have to be thought of as labels. They're more self-identification pieces. And some of them are previous or homophobic language that is being taken back by persons who identify in those ways or want to disrupt the ways that those words are being used. So just to review, we're attempting to complicate gender, to make it not just a binary, to think about gender as a spectrum, as a range, as a personal identity, how we understand ourselves. It's not just male, female, defined by body parts and sexual orientation, or determined by chromosomes. It's not just that. It's related, but it's not just. So we attempt to disrupt the binary, and trans people are doing this in ways that cis people can't. Trans people interrupt the correlation of a particular biological sex with a particular social gender, and often they're considered to have just gotten it wrong, instead of us thinking about this as also a valid expression, a legitimate expression of gender. I asked you to read about Laura Budd's story, yeah? I believe? Pretty sure I asked you to read about Laura. Laura, yep, how small is too small of a community to transition in? So Laura is my relative. She is my dad's cousin and lives maybe 3 miles from where my parents live now. So I babysat her kids when I was young, know her really well. And I know her wife as well. But she performed masculinity for many years. So it wasn't until her 40s that she transitioned. And it's important for us to understand that even though she is a gender and sexual diversity advocate and educator, she realizes that she now can fit or sometimes we say pass within the gender binary as a trans woman. So if you saw her picture this picture, and I asked you the same things that I asked you about the models. What are some of the things that you might say or think about? What are the cues that you have here to perceive her as woman? Yeah, long hair, her clothing choices, the jewelry. Good. Anything else? The way that she's made glasses choice. Yep. So that's probably the most obvious social cues. And if you met Laura in person, she's also very tall. So she's maybe like taller than an average woman might be, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you would take a second glance and go, huh, I wonder if she's trans, you know? So often that's one of the gender police things. Like we try to figure out what body parts they have, or if they've had a sex change. Again, remember I said that asking about body parts, asking trans people about body parts is a violent question. And because she works for Moose Jaw Pride, she's encountered a lot of these questions before and is one of the first people to say, like, ask the question, but I'll tell you if you're offside or not, you know? So you have to be careful about the things that you're thinking, those prejudices that are in your minds when we think about gender as related to biological sex. There's also examples of kids who are transitioning. So you might want to ask yourself, how would I, as a teacher, support one of my students who comes out as trans, who tells me that their name isn't Elizabeth Ann anymore, but now is Cal? Or who somehow is now tasked to explain transitioning to all of their peers. How could you support a student in your class to come out in safe and in safe ways that are also inclusive and nonviolent? How could you support your other students who are classmates with trans students? These are important questions to wonder. So hopefully we can just do things like this newspaper ad. The parents basically just said, oops, our bad. Let's just love Cal. No big deal. Cal wants to be Cal, so Cal is Cal. And we just accept them as they are and support them throughout that transition. Of course, we have backlash. And sometimes this happens in conservative communities. And sometimes it also happens in particular religious communities. And this is one example. I don't think I had you watch her piece, but I have it on the activity, the weekly plans for today. And I don't want to play it in class, but if you're interested, you can play them. I just want to comment on them quickly. She does a rap about bathrooms, basically, and wants to reproduce the gender binary and doesn't think that trans peoples are actually a thing. Basically, that's the gist. So besides the fact that this is an appropriation of the rap genre by a white woman, there are a whole bunch of common rebuttals that she shares related to gender. And I note it because we have been talking about common rebuttals in class in relation to race, and the same thing happens in relation to gender. And then I wanted to note this dad who did a response to her rap. So he also did a rap, use the same mode. Has anyone seen this before? Scott's nodding yes. Anyone else that I missed? Does anyone want to comment if you've seen it before I give my two cents? No? Okay, so he basically offers a myth buster to disrupt this first video. So I would suggest that you just take a look at them and try and find the ways that he attempts to disrupt all of the common rebuttals that she mentions in her piece. Just for the interest of time, we're not going to play it during class, so I just left it on the weekly plans for you. So let's talk about bathrooms a little bit, in schools in particular. What is normal for bathrooms? We know it. What's normal for bathrooms?
Guys and girls.
Yep. And how do we know that they're guys and girls? Like, have you ever been to a restaurant where you had to take another look at the doors? Anyone?
Signs on the doors, they usually have a stick figure with a dress or just a regular stick figure for the male.
Yep. And have there been variations that you've noticed?
Yeah.
Cowgirls.
Susie, what's a variation that you've noticed?
Just that I think it's Sacred Heart School. They built new bathrooms, so it's actually the bathrooms are open out to the hallway, and then so there's one wall, and then on each side of the wall there's mirrors and sinks, and then there's actually the stalls that have like floor to ceiling doors for them to individually go into, so they're non-gender bathrooms.
Yeah. So this is quite different for schools, right? The older school buildings. So I think Sacred Heart's a newer building, or is that piece just been renovated? Do you know, Susie?
They just rebuilt the whole school, I think.
Yeah, I thought so.
It was that one and Scott across the street.
Right. Very good. So again, bathrooms are this, it's like in our infrastructure, even in our buildings is the gender binary. The man-woman binary, the girl-boy binary. These are in our storylines, but also in our interactions with the way that our society is built. And this either allows us to think of ourselves as making sense or to think of ourselves as not fitting, or somewhere in between. So there are moves to try and disrupt the bathroom situation, the change room situation in schools, but it's being done right now in maybe a little bit more prevalent way in restaurants sometimes, where there are individual bathrooms and it's noted on each one that it's not just male or female. Sometimes those words are used, but that it's like an all gender bathroom. Maybe you've noticed some around the schools and the university if you've spent time at the U of R or in other universities. This one is on the second floor of the education building, for example. And it still has the figures, right? It still has, well, this is an all gender washroom, which means that both men and women can use it, but it's still not exactly disrupting the binary, right? There's still the binary on the sign. So we have jokes like the Batman joke over here with the dress on the right. We have jokes about half man, half woman representations, or thinking about bathrooms as being liberated from the gender binary. These are kind of all jokes, but it's important to think about even all user single occupant restrooms, which pays attention to different kinds of bodies, and abilities as well, not just wheelchair, but that's the most obvious. And I call these toilet troubles, right? Because gender neutral bathrooms aren't the solution. It's not like the quick fix for making the gender binary go away, but it can be part of the conversation that undoes gender. I think the last thing I want to leave you with today is around prefixes, but before I do, maybe I'll show you this. This is also from a friend of mine, one of my best friends from school. Posted this on Facebook a couple of years back, and simplified the bathroom issue in a very problematic way. If you have a vagina, go to the women's room. Oh, maybe we could call it the vagina room. We could relabel the bathrooms with a P and a V. So this is a very normative way to understand biological anatomy in relation to gender. And I had a really hard time, like we were best friends in high school. She lives in another province now, so I don't keep in touch with her as often. But I had a really hard time deciding if I should write something on the post, if I should message her, what I should do about it, because all of the comments that she had was like, yeah, that's awesome, I agree, you know, and I really don't think it's that simple. And I had such a hard time with her being so close to me and having this understanding. And so what did I do? Can you guess? What did I do? What would you do?
I would have commented in defense of my point.
Yeah, you would have commented publicly. Good. Okay. So then potentially there's like a Facebook argument that happens, a Facebook fight. Yeah. What about others? Maybe put in the chat. What would you have done? Would you have wrote her? Would you have messaged her? Would you have called her? You know, I still have her phone number. I visit her maybe once a year on my way through her city, going on holiday to the mountains or something. A lot of you would private message. So guess what I did? I'm ashamed to say I got too nervous about it and I've not brought it up with her at all. So, yeah, you know, Jana says it's not worth risking the friendship. And for me, it wasn't even really about risking the friendship. We're not necessarily that close anymore. And I have some guilty feelings about this. You know, it kind of eats at me and I lose sleep over it sometimes, even though it seems silly. But, you know, our friendship is definitely different because I didn't say anything. And I think I still could say something. And maybe you could argue that it's not even ethical for me to talk about it in class. But for me, it's an example of a missed opportunity or a moment when I let fear get the best of me and didn't want to engage in a courageous conversation with one of my closest people in my life. So I think I just wanted to offer it as an example of like, yes, I can talk about critical theory till I'm blue in the face, but if I don't act on it, is it really worth anything? You know, let's look at our own mistakes as well. So the thing I want to leave you with to end is around prefixes. So my last name is Amit. Sounds like vomit. I don't know if I told you that before, but now you'll always remember it, I hope. Don't I just make you want to puke sometimes? It's a joke. It's a joke. Okay, so when I was teaching in high schools, I would always write MS, Miss, Ms, Miss, instead of MISS for kids. I was pretty young when I started teaching. I was 23 and, you know, teaching 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds. So what does the MS refer to in a normative way? What is that? MS in a normative way.
Divorced.
Divorced. Yeah. divorced or gay. So my very first principal asked me once about my partner because I was living with another teacher who happened to be a woman. So I think that he put those two things together and thought, yeah, either she's divorced or gay, I'm not sure. So I want us to think about the ways in which women have to talk about their marital status, but men don't. And the way that our pronouns he, she, hers, his tell others something about how we identify in the world. And there is a movement to stop or to think about gender pronouns differently. So there are charts like this that we can think about different kinds of pronouns to disrupt his and hers. And MX is one of those ways also to say, why do you need that prefix in front of my name? Why do you need to know how I identify necessarily? So the advice I give to new teachers in general is that maybe we don't have to worry so much about, all of these variations, but we could just ask folks. Do you recall that I asked you at the beginning in the survey, in the online survey, what pronouns do you use or what prefix do you use? Sometimes I find online work a little bit difficult, and I want to make sure I'm getting pronouns right. So that's part of what I do. And if I don't know, I use the word they or them instead of worrying about all of these variations. So they or them sometimes is thought of as plural, but it doesn't necessarily have to be thought of as plural. They went to the store doesn't necessarily mean more than one person. Let's talk about Alex Wilson's Coming In Stories next class. So if you haven't had a chance to watch the video yet with Alex Wilson, please do that and consider the guiding questions around gender sovereign or body sovereignty and gender sovereignty. And we'll maybe also take up a little bit about what two-spirit means next class. So think through gender variance a little bit more for next week. And the regulation of bodies. If there are any questions, please stay on the line. Otherwise, I hope you have a really great week. Good luck with finishing your Mythbusters pieces. And I will talk to you for sure next Tuesday. Have a great night.